A reading of Keepers of the Earth by Jeanette Armstrong. The male voice provides our comments and our epilogue, scattered and wild. As a child of 10, I once sat on a hillside on the reservation with my father and his mother as they looked down into the town and the valley floor. It was blackcap, berry season, and the sun was very warm, but there in the high country, a cool breeze moved through the oversharing pines. Bluebirds and canaries darted and chirped in nearby bushes, while a meadowlark sang for rain from the hillside above. Sage and wild roses sent their messages out to the humming bees and pale yellow butterflies. Down in the valley, the heat waves danced, and dry dust rose in clouds from the dirt roads near the town. Shafts of searing glitter reflected off hundreds of windows, while smoke and grayish haze hung over the town itself. The angry sounds of cars honking in a slow crawl along the shimmering black highway and the grind of large machinery from the sawmill next to the town rose in a steady buzzing overtone to the quiet of our hillside. My grandmother said, translated from Okanagan, "The people down there are dangerous. They are all insane." My father agreed, commenting, "It's because they are wild and scatter anywhere."
They have forgotten they are indigenous, of this place, of this earth, connected.
I remember looking down into the town and being afraid. The words my grandmother and my father used to describe the newcomers in the valley offer a way into the perspective I wish to share with you. Since that day with my grandmother and my father, I have heard the Okanagan term for insane and wild used many times by many of my people to describe deeds of the newcomers that make no sense to us.
The nonsense of modernism, of capitalist consumption that is totally unsustainable, of wars, inequality, poverty, and violence. Those out of touch with reality.
I have come to discern the meanings in those terms as they are applied by an Okanagan person whose approach to life is other than that of the mainstream culture. I have always felt that my Okanagan view is perhaps closer in experience to that of an eyewitness and refugee surrounded by Holocaust. I draw on this experience of witness to frame my own comments on a social crisis that has been interpreted in various fields of study as critical. As a Native American, I have felt that crisis as a personal struggle against an utterly pervasive phenomenon.
Capitalist consumption fed by social media and driven by AI and all other things artificial to what it means to be human. My conflict has been to unremittingly resist its entrapment while knowing that it affects every breath I draw. It takes huge effort to escape its enslavement.
Through the lens of that perspective, I view the disorder that is displayed in our city streets, felt in our communities, endured in our homes, and carried inside as personal pain.
A sense of place, time, purpose, and meaning, all lost.
I have come to the same conclusion as my grandmother and father that day long ago when we watched the newcomers enter the valley. The people down there are dangerous. They are all insane. My view could be thought of as a way to differentiate from the newcomers' experience of the world. I do not wish to draw conclusions about the newcomers, culture, or psychology. However, I do wish to assist in seeking junctures in philosophy at which a transformative potential may be implicit. Okanagan, a language that connects. Although I will do my best to share the way I, as an Okanagan born into this maelstrom,
The meta-crisis of a culture founded upon greed and that has lost its way and brought humankind to the edge of extinction.
perceive the situation, I can do this only within the limited capacity permitted by a language that does not contain the words I require. My dilemma is to use the English language in a way that brings my meaning into clarity. I find that I must do this by deconstructing meanings in English that seem to me to affirm a cloistered view of things and by constructing new meanings. I offer a way to look at the Okanagan parallel of the word insane and its meaning in order to illustrate some fundamental ways in which the Okanagan language differs in process from English. I have no trouble remembering Okanagan words uttered a considerable time ago. This is because of the way the Okanagan language replays images in the mind. Okanagan is exclusively vocally rooted. It was never a written language, never transformed into visual symbols that could be translated back into sounds. It was always spoken.
There is fire in the voice, intonation, passion, emotion, feeling that is wholly lost in ink on the page or pixels on a screen. The voice literally speaks and brings forth.
I believe it may be wise to question the idea that language is a system of sound symbols. That is, that the word, as a sound, represents something definable. My thinking is that symbols, seen as compact surrogates of things, seem to take on a concreteness in and of themselves that supplants reality. Words in that sense define the reality, rather than letting the reality define itself. Language sounds would be better regarded as patterns that call forth realities, as a sort of directional signal to a time and place.
Quote, "Words are the clothing of our thoughts," Jonathan Swift. The newcomers have embedded words and language, left brain activity, into their thoughts, imagination, and communication to such an extent that the underlying images, pictures, connectivity, flow, and process, right brain activity, have all but been lost.
Very loosely, I describe the Okanagan language as a system of sounds, through which meaning is called forth by combining a variety of syllables that describe moving pieces of an ongoing reality that stretches away from the speaker. The active reality could be thought of as a sphere sliced into many circles. A circle could be thought of as a physical plane surrounding the speaker. This could be called the present. Moving above and below the speaker, the surrounding sphere may be thought of as the past or the future, with everything always connected to the present reality of the speaker. The Okanagan language creates links by connecting active pieces of reality rather than isolating them.
Experiencing the whole and not just the separate parts. You can know each part and lose sight of the whole, the big picture.
Although the present tense in the English language seems all-pervasive, now is actually an insubstantial thing that is tied to place in a very untenable way. Now just continues, as does all else. Therefore, we might perceive my meaning better if we leave the designations for past, present, and future aside, and think instead of a vast thing that is continuing, in which we are immersed, and that we can call by making certain sounds. If we put aside designations like nouns and verbs, and think simply of sounds that revive components of reality from that in which we are continuously immersed, then we can think of a language that remakes little parts of a larger, ongoing activity. This creates a system in which syllables are animated describers of pieces of activity and can be combined to develop meanings that then give a more complete picture, and could end up close to what might constitute a noun or a verb in English, though they are quite different to me when experienced in the mind.
The previous two paragraphs resonate well with the following insights from David Bohm, an eminent quantum physicist. For fragmentation is now very widespread, not only throughout society, but also in each individual, and this is leading to a kind of general confusion of the mind, which creates an endless series of problems and interferes with our clarity of perception so seriously as to prevent us from being able to solve most of them. Furthermore, Bohm comments, words are inadequate to fully describe reality. Our language is far too object-oriented or noun-based, and argued that this was making us see a world of static objects instead of dynamic processes.
Talking. Talking inside the head. The Okanagan word for insane is a good example of this. The 4 syllables in the word, which are used to form the meaning, are each mini descriptions of an active reality. When put together, they form a whole picture, which then becomes an action image, describing, in a state of talking, talking inside the head. Doubling the description in the act of talking forms a mini picture of opposing voices rather than simply many voices. The meaning of the word relies on further connection for coherence in context. It requires a larger active picture. The meaning can then become quite specific. If I were to transliterate the Okanagan meaning of my grandmother's words, it might be this: the ones below who are not of us, as place, may be a chaotic threat in action. They are all self-absorbed, arguing inside each of their heads. My father's words might be something like this: their actions have a source. They have displacement panic. They have been pulled apart from themselves as family, generational sense, and place as land asa survival.
The term displacement panic well describes a sense of the newcomers removed from an authentic self, real community, real place, full of connection and wholeness.
In examining the meanings in this brief dialogue, the differences become clearer between self, community, surroundings, and time sense, as understood in the mainstream culture from the Okanagan view of a healthy, whole person. I comment on my view of each only as I perceive them. I do not speak for the Okanagan people. Rather, I speak of my knowledge as an Okanagan. By describing these differences, I wish to make clear why my grandmother and my father spoke those words that day long ago when we watched the newcomers enter the valley, words with which I know I agree. The people down there are dangerous. They are all insane.
Dangerous because they are generally greedy, hedonistic, selfish, driven by consumption, combative, competitive, uncaring, and care little for their home planet Earth.
The four selves. The first difference I want to explore has to do with the idea of what we are as an individual life force within our skins, and how we might think that in relation to the unseen terrain we traverse as we walk the land.
A life force within our skin, that thin boundary between us and the rest of the Earth, but that boundary is porous. That which we define as I, me. We are but ripples in the infinite flow. Please also see our Substack post, Perspectives on Humankind.
I speak of how we perceive that, and in consequence, how we perceive the effect on the world around us. When we, as Okanagans, speak of ourselves as individual beings within our bodies, we think of our whole being as made up of various capacities. We identify the whole person as having four main capacities that operate together: the physical self, the emotional self, the thinking, intellectual self, and the spiritual self. The four selves can be described as having equal importance in the way we function within and experience all things. The capacities can loosely be described as what joins us with the rest of creation in a healthy way.
We are made from stardust. Everything in the universe is forged in the heart of stars and has emerged through interaction. Everything in essence is vibrating energy E equals mc squared, all from the same stuff, but each with distinct capacities influencing the continuing emergence.
Each, including the body, is an internal capacity parallel to what is thought of as mind. The physical self, which is body as one part of the whole self, is dependent entirely on everything that sustains it and keeps it alive in an interface with the parts of us that continue outside the skin. We survive within our skin inside the rest of our vast selves. We survive by how our body interacts with everything around us continuously.
We are relationship, we are connection.
Only in part are we aware in our intellect, through our senses, of that interaction. Okanagans teach that the body is the earth itself. They say that our flesh, blood, and bones are earth body. In all cycles in which the earth moves, so does our body.
From dust to dust, from dust.
We are everything that surrounds us, including the vast forces we only glimpse. If we cannot maintain and stay in balance with the outer self, then we cannot continue as an individual life form, and we dissipate back into the larger self. Our body-mind is extremely knowledgeable in that way. As Okanagans, we say our body is sacred. It is the core of our being, which permits the rest of self to be. It is the great gift of our existence. Our word for body literally means the land-dreaming capacity.
What Arne Nace refers to as ecological self, because it suggests that the wider self is not some insubstantial, ethereal intellectualization, but rather deeply rooted in the very materiality of our planet, in its teeming biodiversity, its ancient crumpled continents, its swirling atmosphere, and the depths and shallows of its lakes, rivers, and oceans. Thus, the ecological self is not only the human self, it is also the self or soul of the world, the anima mundi that awakens us to our full humanity when we know palpably, in our very bones, that there is a selfhood far vaster than the one in which we live and have our being, and to which we are ultimately accountable.
The emotional self is differentiated from the body self, the thinking, intellectual self, and the spiritual self. In our language, the emotional self is thought of as the part with which we link to other parts of our larger selves around us. We use a term that translates as heart. It is a capacity to bond and form attachment with particular parts and aspects of our surroundings. We say that we as people stay connected to each other, our land, and all things by our hearts. As Okanagans, we teach that this is an essential element of being whole, human, and Okanagan.
To make whole, holy, to heal through love and care for all both human and non-human.
We never ask a person, "What do you think?" Instead, we ask, "What is your heart on this matter?" Where is your heart on these existential meta-crisis matters as one of the newcomers? The Okanagan teaches that emotion or feeling is the capacity whereby community and land intersect in our beings and become part of us. By this capacity, we are one with others and all our surroundings. This bond or link is a priority for our individual wholeness and well-being.
As opposed to the fragmentation and separateness as newcomers, as those who need to remember what it means to be, what it means to be human.
The strength with which we bond in the widest of circles gives us our criterion for leadership. It is the source from which the arts spring in celebration and affirmation of our connectedness. The thinking, intellectual self has another name in Okanagan. Our word for thinking logic and storage of information, memory, is difficult to translate into English because it does not have a full parallel. The words that come closest in my interpretation have the meaning, the spark that ignites. We think of this capacity as simply a beginning point from which other things occur. We use a term that translates as directed by the ignited spark to refer to analytical thought. In the Okanagan language, we translate this to mean that the other capacities we engage in when we take action are only directed by the spark of memory once it is ignited. We know in our traditional Okanagan methods of education that this self must be disciplined to work in concert with the other selves in order to engage its abilities far beyond its automatic response capacity.
We are not machines, and much of newcomer intelligence is indeed artificial.
We know, too, that unless we always join this capacity to the heart self, its power can be a destructive force, both with respect to ourselves and to the larger selves that surround us. A fire that is not controlled can destroy.
This represents much of what is wrong in newcomer society.
The spirit self is hardest to translate. It is also referred to by the Okanagan as a part of the individual being, while at the same time being the larger self of which all things are part. We translate the word used for our spirit self as without substance while moving continuously outward.
Spirit can also be depicted as soul. Our definition of soul is the manifestation of perfect oneness as reflected through and within all, soul of the world or the ecological self, referred to earlier, which is worth repeating here. The anima mundi that awakens us to our full humanity, when we know, palpably, in our very bones, that there is a selfhood far more vast than the one in which we live and have our being, and to which we are ultimately accountable.
The Okanagan language teaches that this self requires a great quietness capacity.
Quote, in silence, you can listen to your own heartbeat. You can take the pulse of continuity. In silence, you can dream great dreams. You can discover your own music. Unquote, Dancing Moons, Nancy Wood and Frank Howell.
Before our other parts can become conscious of it, and that the other capacities fuse together and subside in order to activate something else, which is this. Okanagans describe this capacity as the place where all things are. It teaches that this old part of us can interpret, all knowledge being spoken by all things that surround us, including our own bodies, in order to bring new knowledge into existence. The Okanagan says that this is the true self. It has great power. It is a source for all things and affects all things if we engage it within the rest of our life force activity. The Okanagan refers to it as the living source of our life. Community, our one skin. The second difference I wish to discuss is our relationship as social beings to human social constructs. I want to outline how the Okanagan perceives this and how it might affect people around us. A teaching of the Okanagan is that each person is born into a family and a community. No person is born isolated from those two things. You are born into a way of interacting with one another. As an Okanagan, you are automatically a part of the rest of the community. You belong. You are them. You are within family and community. You are that which is family and community. Within that, you cannot be separate. You are not separate unless you totally leave people and live alone in the land. All are affected by the actions of any one individual within family and community, and so all must know this in their individual selves. This capacity to bond is absolutely critical to individual wellness. Without it, the person is said to be crippled, incapacitated, and lifeless. To not have community or family is to be scattered or falling apart.
The newcomers have to try and find themselves because they have fallen apart, have scattered, are in the wrong place. They are not whole. They are removed from their place in and of the world.
The Okanagan refers to relationship to others by a word that means our one skin. This means that we share more than a place. We share a physical tie that is uniquely human. It also means that the bond of community and family is a history of many before us and many ahead of us who share our flesh. We are tied together by those who brought us here and gave us blood and gave us place. Our most serious teaching is that community comes first in our choices, then family, and then ourselves as individuals, because without community and family, we are truly not human.
Most newcomers have this the wrong way around and care little for active, authentic community.
The language of the land. The third difference between the Okanagan perception of the self and that of the dominant culture has to do with the us that is place. The capacity to know we are everything that surrounds us.
We are relationship. We are indigenous. To experience our humanness in relation to all else, and in consequence to know how we affect the world around us, and how it in turn affects us.
The Okanagan word for our place on the land and our language is the same. The Okanagan language is thought of as the language of the land. This means that the land has taught us our language. The way we survived is to speak the language that the land offered us as its teachings, to know all the plants, animal seasons, and construct language for them. We also refer to the land in our bodies with the same root syllable. This means that the flesh which is our body is pieces of the land come to us through the things which the land is.
97% of the human body is made of the same elements as our home planet Earth, which in turn were formed at the center of stars.
The soil, the water, the air, and all other life forms contributed parts to be our flesh. We are our land place. Not to know and to celebrate this is to be without language and without land. It is to be displaced.
As newcomers are.
The Okanagan teaches that anything displaced from all that it requires to survive in health will eventually perish.
As under the decomposition and separateness of modernist culture.
Unless place can be relearned, it compels all other life forms to displacement and then ruin. This is what is referred to as wildness, a thing that cannot survive without special protective measures, and that requires other life forms to change behavior in its vicinity. As Okanagans, our most essential responsibility is to learn to bond our whole individual selves and our communal selves to the land. Many of our ceremonies have been constructed for this. We join with the larger self, outward to the land, and rejoice in all that we are. We are this one part of Earth. Without this self, we are not human. We yearn. We are incomplete. We are wild, needing to learn our place as land pieces. We cannot find joy because we need place in this sense to nurture and protect our family, community, self. The thing Okanagans fear worst of all is to be removed from the land that is their life and their spirit. Hands of the spirit. The fourth difference between the Okanagan conception of the self and that of the dominant culture has to do with the idea that, as earth pieces, we are an old life form. As an old life form, we each travel a short journey through time, in which we briefly occupy a space as a part of an old human presence on the land. The Okanagan word for earth uses the same root syllable as the word for our spirit self. It is also the word for referring to all life forces as one spirit in the same way as the human spirit capacity. The Okanagan points out that all things are the same in this way. In that capacity, everything we see is a spirit. Spirit is not something that is invisible, in the mind, or subjective. It exists.
It is humankind that has separated material and spiritual, created a divide, a boundary, where there is none. Spirit infused in matter. Even our most advanced science, quantum, is proving this through concepts of wave, particle duality, and potentiality.
We are part of that existence in a microscopic way. The Okanagan teaches that we are tiny and unknowledgeable in our individual selves. It is the whole earth part of us that contains immense knowledge. Over the generations of human life, we have come to discern small parts of that knowledge, and humans house this internally. The way we act in our human capacity has significant effects on the earth, because it is said that we are the hands of the Spirit, and that we can fashion earth pieces with that knowledge, and therefore transform the earth. It is our most powerful potential, and so we are told that we are responsible for the earth. We are keepers of the earth because we are earth. We are old earth, we are custodians.
We are custodians and stewards. With great knowledge comes great responsibility. We must live our lives within this great responsibility as custodians and stewards that act in the best interest of the whole soul. Epilogue. The insanity of the newcomers with their untethered, selfish ideas of separation, dominance, scientific reductionist modernism, and the illusion of economic wealth creation have totally lost their way fighting against the ever-present universality with which they are one, and which, if left unabated, will annihilate them. They chose to totally disconnect from their blood and bones, their earth body, from which they emerged and will return, and to trash the planet. Being in the present and recognizing their connection with and contribution to the great unfolding of the beauty that surrounds them is either a far, far distant memory or a far-off utopian dream when in fact it is here and now and readily realizable if they would only recognize it and change their ways. The predicament of the newcomers, their insanity, was spread throughout the world by colonization, destroying, pillaging, exploiting, raping, and exterminating the indigenous people, their cultures, and their societies as if they were non-human. The newcomers believing themselves to be superior and having the God-given right to dominate, the greatest crime against humanity ever committed. Once they broke the backs of what they determined to be heathens, they indoctrinated future generations to their way of being, culminating in the dominant global culture embraced today, that of capitalism, which is the economic basis for most of the world's economies, and the number of people living under capitalism is essentially the world's total population. Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit, a profit dominated by overconsumption, one which ignores the costs it classes as external to its closed system, associated with pollution and other aspects of the meta-crisis, such as inequality, over-extraction, crisis of meaning, biological risk, warfare and creeper, artificial intelligence risks, etc., the greatest crimes ever committed against our home planet Earth. It is estimated only 3.8% of the global population directly own equity in the capitalist system. The colonizing invaders did not need to carry out their heinous crimes against the indigenous, and ultimately many more, people. They could have engaged in dialogue with them, embraced them, understood their knowledge and wisdom, and combined it with theirs in order to evolve together in a peaceful manner rather than inflicting extreme violence upon them. To paraphrase the Eagles' song, Last Resort, they even brought a neon sign Jesus is coming, brought the white man's burden down, brought the white man's name. They brought carnage and evil. Some years ago, I became very interested in quantum physics, its science, metaphor, and philosophy. One of my favorite writers is David Bohm, and he introduced a colleague, David Peat, who had written a book called Blackfoot Physics, which draws amazing resemblances between Blackfoot myths, legends, cultures, and stories, their science, and what is emerging from modern science, particularly in the quantum realm, potentiality, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts non-duality, etc. It is as if indigenous people knew through spirit before modern scientific man did through science the deep connection of all. We must remember this connection. We must remember our destiny as earth bodies.